Vinay Gupta, welcome.
Hi.
One of the godfathers of blockchain.
Maybe it's small. I came in pretty late.
Yeah, you came in pretty late, but you were one of the best, one of the final speakers of the day. Everybody's very excited about to hear your story, because today we're going to talk about when we're going to put all this theory into practice and where are we going to be in 10 years from now. So, in that perspective, where are we now?
Well, so people say, what year is it on the blockchain, right? If you were going to parallel the blockchain development to the internet development, what year is it? And I have a very precise answer for that. It's very early in 1991.
1991.
1991. Before the invention of the web browser, before the invention of the hyperlink. Because we're still in a position where what we have is this raw technology for doing transactions. There's no user interface. Right? There's no link. There's nothing you click on that takes you from one thing to another thing and carries some context, shows you your way like navigating around a space. There's none of that. There's just these raw transactions, which are basically like files.
We just left MS-DOS.
Yeah. That's where we are,
Metaphorically.
Right? But the clock is running maybe 4 times or 5 times or 10 times as fast as it did. Like 6 months in blockchain feels like 3 years on the internet. So I think that we're moving much faster than we did in the 1990s, but I still think we're at the beginning of the beginning.
Yeah, the beginning of the beginning, and well, we're at the conference now, and there's this lot of discussion about, is this the new religion, or is this going to be change a lot of distribution ways or banking ways? There's all this discussion going on, and nobody really knows where to go, and that's why you're here, right? You're going to show them the way.
Well, I mean, look, there's 2 sides to this, right? We have a bunch of genuinely horrific, old, messy, horrible systems. Right? The inside of bank IT, 30-year-old mainframe computers running COBOL programs written 20 years before that in emulation, hundreds of copies of customer addresses inside of databases strewn over the banks. When one bank buys another bank, they usually just keep all the old IT running.
Yeah.
So a bank that's done a lot of acquisitions often has like 60 different IT departments. This stuff is nightmarish, right? The idea that you could bring in some new computer technology and clean that entire mess out, that's not a revolution, right? It's a revolution inside of banking, but you as a customer are not going to notice a single client service change. And at that point, frankly, who cares? Right?
No. As a customer, you don't care, right?
You don't care, right? They're not going to change their service offering. They've cleaned up a bunch of their IT mess. We don't care about that. That's not a revolution. It's a revolution inside of banking IT. Globally, doesn't matter at all. Right? Similarly, shipping, logistics, all the rest of this kind of stuff, right? Did you ever care about the paperwork load of shipping goods internationally?
That's not my business, so
It's not my business, right? No. Once in a while I'll get a customs notification if I order like a t-shirt from America. Customs notification, you have to pay £2.40 before we'll let it out of customs for you. Okay, right. It's a minor pain in the ass. But at the end of the day, you don't care. As long as somebody else cares about that, it'll be a revolution over there, right? The internet, when it landed, it hit you right where you live, right? Everything that you wanted to know, everything you wanted to watch, everything you were interested in, all of your friends, you have relatives that if the internet went away, you'd never see again.
No.
They'd just vanish, right? So we're not at the point where the blockchain has hit people where they live yet. What we're seeing is a whole bunch of basically corporate IT overhauls, plus Bitcoin and a few other big currencies and Ethereum. Right? And that's all that's happening, right? Corporate IT overhauls and modernizations of crazy archaic systems and global currencies issued by collectives or federations of nerds.
Yeah.
That's the real story.
That's the real story.
The corporate IT stuff, there is so much money to be made there. It's an infinite ocean of money. Frankly, they'll be feeding off that for the next 15 years. But that's always what happens with new computer technology or corporate IT. Every revolution. Remember cloud?
Yeah.
10 years of let's clean up the banking mess with cloud. How much progress did they make? I have no idea. I don't need to know. Right? So you've got to separate these 2 stories out, right?
Yeah.
Blockchain for corporate IT is just another revolution in corporate IT. We've seen that a whole bunch of times. Blockchain for kind of, global banking, that's a revolution which is ongoing. And then in the big sort of middle, there's this question of what does it mean to us personally?
Yeah.
Nobody knows yet.
No.
Right? I don't think you're going to see the real personal daily transformation until you see blockchain-based social networks.
Yes.
Right? Because social networking is kind of where we live. That's what really happens in our day-to-day business.
And do you think about a payment system which we're going to use on social systems? From end-to-end user?
Oh, this is a super hard question.
Yeah.
So you could see a world in which Bitcoin or Ether were used for payments. You could also see a world where the banks or the governments issue their own Bitcoin-like thing, and we use that for payments. Or you could see the credit card companies come out with something which is a bit more friendly to electronic payments than ordinary card payments. Because card payments are expensive, right? They're charging you, 1.8% and 25 cents a payment and this kind of number. So if that came down to, a tenth of a cent, because of the competition from the blockchain, that's another way that it might all play out. But it's the transformation of the relationship between social networks and money that I see as being the real transformative point. Think of what it's like if you want to organize a holiday with a couple of dozen friends, right? We're all going to go, we're going to rent someplace, a couple of ski huts, we're going to go skiing. The amount of paperwork necessary to get that to work, the endless chasing people for money and who's got the debit card and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, it makes spending time with your friends really difficult. It makes organizing collectively to do things like buy a house difficult, rent an office space, all these kind of things. So we've got the same paperwork plague that we've got in other things, but it affects our ability to organize socially in new ways. So if we can get this fusion of blockchain and social networks correct, then what you get is the ability to collectively organize payments, which gives you the ability to collectively purchase, rent, borrow, buy, whatever it happens to be, in ways which would change the way we live. Right, and I think that stuff is coming. I think it's inevitable, and I think it's possibly hugely transformative in a way that you'll notice 50 times a day.
Oh, that's revolution. That's what it sounds like.
Well, that I think we would notice, right? But the corporate IT stuff, it really needs done. It will change the lives of hundreds of people, thousands of people. I'm saying hundreds of thousands of people, but only because it changes what happens when they go to work. Right? Yeah. The stuff that hits you in your domestic life, the stuff that hits you in your professional life, you never cared how your bank worked before. There's no reason to care now that it's a blockchain power.
No.
It's not until it comes into our personal lives through social networking and maybe through media that we'll really notice.
Yeah, and is the way we tell that story now, is that good enough for consumers? Because
we haven't even started to explain, right? So to be honest, actually, it's not even about explaining. I remember in the 1990s, there was a period of about 10 years when there were people whose profession was to explain the internet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I spent a couple of years making a living explaining the blockchain. It only happens before the technology is really widely distributed. Because once it's widely distributed, nobody asks what it is anymore. They've seen it.
And they use it.
And
I don't think about it anymore.
And at that point, it no longer has a name. So, the places where you see real action on this early, right? Crowdfunding of TV shows, right? One of my favorite TV shows, The Expanse, was recently cancelled on one channel, and 2 weeks afterwards, maybe days even, one of the other companies came in and said, we'll pick that up. I think it went to Netflix or maybe it went to Amazon, right? But it was this immediate thing of I'm glad that's still happening. But if they'd turned to the public and said, right, we need this much money organized in the following way to be able to make some more episodes of the show, and when these episodes show, you'll be able to collect a royalty on that, and that'll pay you back some of what you put in this kind of structure. I don't think that these things would have any problem funding themselves.
No.
And you can move into a world where the TV shows you what you want to see rather than what somebody guessed you wanted to see. Collective organization of funding for shared projects.
So as a consumer, you're going to be part of production.
Yes.
You're going to own the production.
Absolutely.
In some way.
And I think that is a huge revolution because it gives people the ability to put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah.
Right? Your favorite artists want, 75 grand of an advance to go and record a new album. They go to the fans rather than to the record company. And what happens is that we see things which are, loved and cherished directly by people, funded by people. Right? I care about that. There's a super easy way for me to put money behind it, and you get this direct kind of closing of the loops. And I think in terms of cultural change, that could be enormous.
Yeah, because I like the expense. You like the expense.
Yeah.
But we are not living in the same country.
Right.
But in a way, we are a community. Then.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And if you had a way that we could work together financially to support that show, that's how we would do it, right?
Yeah.
And the blockchain makes that possible. The business practices haven't caught up yet.
I saw some footage of you talking to Vincent, and you were also mentioning that the blockchain is going to be big, but we also have to keep in mind that the United States is a very dominant power, and also in the banking system, and they are the ones in between, and that's a very it's a very big story, very international story. But I was thinking, like, is it going to be a threat to the dominance of the United States, or am I using the wrong words now?
Well, so there's this thing called the Petro Dollar. They used to talk about it a lot in the 70s and 80s, maybe the 90s. It kind of went away a bit. So the Petro Dollar is just the fact that you need to buy dollars to buy oil because oil is sold for dollars.
Yeah, and there's an endless demand for dollars then.
And as a result, the dollar rides at a somewhat higher level than it would without the petrodollar.
Yes.
So if somebody did something like, hey, let's sell oil in Bitcoin, right? You know, take some country like Venezuela, right? If they rolled out a program like that, and, you know, the petro is maybe a step in that direction, you have to wonder whether the Americans would come down on them, right?
Yeah.
On the other hand, it doesn't seem very likely at all that the Americans are going to have a hard time with corporate IT inside of banking overhauling their systems and modernizing them onto an internal blockchain. They don't care about that at all. So monetary policy is a different thing from technology, right? I think the interface between the nation states and globalism is very, very, very messy. You know, you've got a bunch of nation states, you know, projecting power globally. You've got the UN, which is attempting to organize the states to address global issues, but it seems to be a total basket case. You know, we're just really short of systems that work globally in a smooth way, and instead what we have is superpowers extending global influence. So in a sense, the blockchain is an alternate narrative to global powers exerting global superpowers exerting global influence. But in the 21st century, American influence can't expand anymore.
No.
They've maxed that
End
out.
stage,
There's
right.
nowhere else to go,
No.
right? They've expanded as much as you could possibly imagine them expanding. The Chinese, on the other hand, are enormously internationally expansive. Colonization of Africa, One Belt, One Road, you know, huge expansions of Chinese language media.
Yeah.
So
They use soft power.
they use
instead of
soft
hard
power very effectively, right?
Infrastructure.
Whereas the Americans are about just like, hey, we came and killed everything, right? So in that context, it makes a lot of sense for the Americans to ally with the global forces of the internet and, you know, this kind of internationalism as a way of preventing the Chinese expanding and being simply the next global superpower. Right. You'd much rather have an age of multilateralism and, you know, kind of computer-mediated cooperation rather than going to having another superpower acting as the broker for everything.
Yes.
Right. So I think that there's a really good play to be made by the Western democracies to say, look, you know, we did that superpower thing, and we're going to make the superpower obsolete before we lose to the Chinese. And what does it look like if you make the superpower obsolete? It means global end-to-end trade, minimum tariffs, right? Really well-organized track and trace so you can make sure that you're not importing things which are illegal in your country. You know, there's a whole bunch of things you would do to produce a world in which goods and services flow as freely as information. But if you build that world, it has to be multilateral, and it devalues superpower status.
Yeah.
Because
does the current superpower allow that? That's the big question. The big
well,
if.
I mean, right now the American government isn't really doing anything. It doesn't have a foreign policy. It has a constant response to presidential mandates, you know, and the government is running hard to try and catch up with whatever the president said yesterday. There's no real evidence that it's got a coherent international policy. So I don't think we have to worry too much about how the Americans are looking at things right now. Even the federal regulators are taking their time. I think it will be under the next administration, you'll see sort of like 4 years or 8 years of sudden catch-up where, you know, all of the American models get updated one after another for the world that they're then in.
Yeah.
And in that respect, I think the Trump administration may force a lot of fundamental re-examination of structure in the American system.
Like this is the way we don't want it.
Well, there's some of that, but
Yeah.
there's also just... now, how do I say this exactly? You know, think of what it's like if you take a year out of your university to go somewhere else, and then you come back to finish your final year. Or between high school and university, you go traveling, this kind of thing.
We've changed.
You need perspective,
Yeah.
right? So we'd gone from a series of very, very, very similar governments, one after another, in which nobody questioned the fundamental assumptions about the validity of the state or the integrity of the nation or any of that stuff. It was all very bolted down to a standard model. And it went a little left and a little right and a little up and a little down, but it was all basically the same story. Trump comes in with a completely different model, and simply the shock of that has made people realize that what they had was a model. It wasn't objective reality. It wasn't the simple truth. It was just the way that Washington did things.
Yes.
And the sudden transformation to something else, I think, has shaken a lot of people awake. Right? What will happen when they go back to the regular model of government and have a president who's from the political class and does things the usual way? Maybe they won't let it go back all the way. Maybe there will be a new alertness that says, actually, we are incredibly powerful. When we go off base, the whole world gets dragged with us. We have to be more responsible. We have to be more precise. Maybe it'll produce a new sense of responsibility among the Americans. Or maybe they're going to elect Oprah Winfrey and it'll be another round of media circus. I don't know.
What you saying is that a world government is maybe one step quicker because of blockchain.
I think
the world is going to integrate much quicker.
I think it's 15 steps closer.
15.
Right? Well, I mean, I'm not convinced that we need a world government, right? Any more than having a national government got rid of the need for a mayor, right? I don't think a world government gets rid of the need for nation states. But if we don't have some kind of platform above the nation state for dealing with global issues, what are we going to do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, global warming and, the nanotech, biotech risk, all of these kind of technological risks that are coming down the pipe. Do you want, a bunch of nation states squabbling with each other, passing kind of like the worst possible legislation because that brings in the investment? Kind of race to the bottom legislation on all of these issues? Or do you want a single global standard that everybody has to meet, right? I think we want single global standards for things like, global biodefense.
Human decency.
Human decency is much harder than biodefense, right? Everybody agrees that we ought to have a good frontier that prevent things like plagues breaking out or the world warming and destroying agriculture. That's an easy thing to argue for. Human decency, if you ask the Swedes about America...
Everybody has different standards, right?
Everybody has different standards. And frankly, most of the really powerful countries have really low standards, right? You ask the Swiss about free speech or the Swedes about healthcare, right? And they'll look at almost all of the other Western democracies as just like, you guys are barbarians. Right? Even inside of the Western democratic paradigm, there are countries which have such incredibly high standards, it's very clear that we can't drag the world up to meet them, and it would be a crime to drag them down to meet the world. Right? Yeah. So that stuff, I think we have to leave regional. But the global issues, global warming, nanotechnology, biotechnology, possibly AI regulation, blockchain, right? Currency, asteroid protection, all the rest, all the big risky stuff, and global trade, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't be working hard to produce some sort of sensible global system. And let me say a specific thing about this. The UN is a trade organization for nation states, right?
Yes.
You get the nation states together around a table, they make decisions. There's no direct representation of the citizen at the UN.
No.
And I think we could fix that now. I think with the internet, it's not impossible to imagine building something either beside the UN or inside of the UN or above the UN, which is intended for citizen representation at the global level. Now, there are some amazing political theory problems with that. There are some very hard truths we'd have to face if we did it.
Yeah.
But if we don't do it, how are we going to get the authority necessary to get the lid on these other problems? And to me, this is what the 21st century political struggle is really about. It's figuring out how to do globalism in a way that gives us the power to stop these terrible global threats becoming real because we were too disorganized to stop them, in a way that preserves what's good about the nation state rather than simply squashing it.
And blockchain is going to be a major player in that.
Well, blockchain is the next evolution of the internet. Right? I mean, it's clear the internet has brought global society into contact with itself in a totally new way. Blockchain then gives you the ability to do actual transactions and that, so you can send not just messages but money, goods, these kind of things. It makes it usable for business in a way the internet never was. So at that point, it's natural that will drive the next step. But also, the global warming thing and the political crisis that goes with it are so much closer than they were.
Yes, they are.
15 years ago, if you were really freaked out, you were a weirdo. Now, if you're really freaked out, you're paying attention.
Yes.
And we see things like
It changed so quick.
It changed really quickly. And they say it's going to change even faster. So I see that as being the kind of clear and present danger that we have to find global ways of responding to, or the permafrost melts and the sea's cooking. Oh my God, what a mess.
I could talk to you all day long, but that's not my assignment. Let's talk about cryptocurrency. We got Bitcoin, we got Ethereum, and we got all these altcoins.
Yes.
Some are tokens, some are utility coins.
Yeah.
Where are we going with this? Is this going to be the next market for everything to trade until all the assets are going to be tokens or coins, shares?
Well, right. No hard questions. So, first thing is, an awful lot of people are going to go to jail, right?
To jail because they...
Well, I mean, okay, the SEC doesn't send people to jail, they'd issue enormous fines.
Yeah, fines.
But a lot of people are going to get enormous life-changing fines, and probably a bunch of them will get done for other kinds of fraud. And there's going to be an enormous cleaning out of that entire process. And there's a decent chance that people will say that was the end of crypto, it's all over, forget it, and it'll crash the price of Bitcoin, right? That is a very realistic possibility that I think anybody in this industry has to be prepared for.
Yeah.
Because the regulators have a choice, which is either you let it basically run as this enormous thieves market where they're just cripplingly huge amounts of fraud and people are losing their houses, or you shut the entire thing down and kill the innovation. And the regulators are sitting there kind of steering down the knife edge, and the possibility is that they'll slip and they'll accidentally kill the whole damn thing, and then it will have to regrow from places like Hyperledger at IBM, and you'll get the permission blockchains, and then gradually you get the rebuilding of the global systems off the back of that. So that's the big risk, right? Over-strenuous regulation results in a hard crash. Nobody wants to see that, right? What they want to see is the end of mass fraud and the beginning of a sensible regulated environment for using regulated stuff on chain. So what do we mean by regulated stuff, right? I talk about fiat property. Fiat property is any class of property that the government is involved in defining. So houses, cars, copyright, patent, trademark, all of these assets, the governments are intimately involved in the creation of that asset class. The entire shape of a car is government mandated for things like crash safety and energy efficiency. You can't just make your own car and drive it down the street.
You have a lot of standards and regulations.
All this stuff. So these things are all creatures of the state already. And if you want to be able to move them around, you're going to wind up with state-regulated entities that move around state-regulated property. You can't get around this, right? Property which only exists on the internet, that only exists in this kind of virtual form, you can make an argument that the states shouldn't regulate it. Like CryptoKitties, okay, theoretically these things are covered by copyright, but practically speaking, to all intents and purposes, the blockchain governs them, and that's fine, right?
Yeah.
We ought to have some room in the system for that. But for the assets which are integrally related to the state, you're going to need regulated entities to move those things around. Otherwise, the state which creates the property and regulates the property will not let you transfer the property. And, I mean, it's horrible that it works this way. Nobody wants it to work this way.
No.
But if we don't let it work that way, you don't get to buy and sell houses in Amsterdam for Bitcoin without it being a wildcat transaction that's unenforceable.
You need security.
You need security, right? Real world, real people, real lives. You're just going to wind up with the state along for the ride. Now, the hard question is, does the state permit a total fluidization of property rights, right? Are we going to be in a position where, 21-year-olds have a wallet with 5,000 different assets in it, hedged using an algorithm that they're paying a royalty for that allows them to manipulate their portfolio, so that people's politics and their views about the future are directly represented by asset holdings, and, you've got some kid with a net worth of $1,700 who's globally diversified. Better world or worse world, right? Is that kind of massive financialization of everything what we want? Or is that just, the market trying to shove itself into the few remaining corners that it's not allowed in? And I genuinely can't tell, right?
No.
So
are you saying that the future of cryptocurrency depends on what the state is going to allow and going to regulate?
Well,
because otherwise we don't have security. We're going to have... Yeah.
Not necessarily the future of cryptocurrency, but crypto assets. If you're going to be dealing with tokenizations of stuff, if the state doesn't allow that particular kind of stuff to be tokenized, what will happen is that when you try and enforce your property rights on the token, the state will just be like, no, and it will stay with the original owner, right? So somebody tokenizes it in a way that's illegal, they sell the tokens, the token holders try and take hold of the asset, and the state is just like, no, and that guy's going to jail. You can't do that. It's all fraud. You're not going to touch it. Yeah. It'll be as if the transactions never happened, but you can't get your money back, right? So you either wind up in that world where these kinds of property are just barred from the chain, Or you wind up in a world where you've got this kind of infinite fluidization of property, and everybody starts representing their wealth as these complex hedged portfolios. In that second scenario, what I wonder is whether you get unbelievably, hysterically, terrifyingly volatile financial systems that just destroy people's wealth or randomly double it. Because, the money can't really come from nowhere, right?
No.
So you either wind up with mass hedging and the whole thing just kind of smoothly takes a lot of the bumpiness out of the financial system because everybody's hedged and people are responsible and the whole thing kind of works. Does that sound like human nature?
No.
Or what you get is these kind of mass hysterias where perfectly ordinary assets are suddenly jumping up and down in these hyper volatile ways as, the general public is piling in or out depending on what Kim Kardashian wore that day. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I
love the Kardashian metaphor.
It would be really tricky, right? Kim Kardashian's wearing red shoes. Quick, everybody buy, right? And those kind of problems, imagine that you had a state regulator looking at this like, well, we either deny the future and keep the status quo, or we try and find some path where we get some more flexibility and some more freedom for people to invest in the way that they want to, but not in a way that sparks mass hysteria. How could you approach that, right? You could ban high-frequency trading. You could mandate assets would be held for 30 days or something like that.
Yeah.
There are lots of things you could do to maybe dampen those systems down to prevent the volatility. But there's this core principle at the bottom of that, which is, are people free to do what they want with their own money or not? And all the evidence is, if you just let them run wild, they go bankrupt a lot. And you wind up with enormous concentrations of wealth in the hands of the lucky and the manipulative, and total destitution everywhere else.
And we have the same, the haves and the have-nots.
Well, it's political too. Yeah. Scotland lost its independence after a thing called the Darien Scheme, where the entire population of Scotland piled money behind the idea that they were going to build a city somewhere near Panama. And it turned out to be a malaria-infested swamp. Everybody died. Scotland went bankrupt, and then the English took over. Right? Imagine that with cryptocurrencies happening to an entire continent, not just a little country like Scotland.
No.
There are huge risks here because of human nature. And the question is, if we're going to bring these technologies into people's lives, how do we damp those risks? Because these risks are behavioral economics, right? The predictably irrational behavior of human beings in large groups is well understood. And if you give them the tools to wreck themselves, they're going to do it. So,
and can we conclude this with saying time will tell? We have to keep monitoring, adapting.
Country by country experiment, right? One of the great functions of the nation state is it provides you with some protection from risk, right?
Yeah.
You do it in one country, you see what happens. If it was a disaster, we don't do that.
And you can learn from them.
You can learn from it, right? So you get some bold early adopters like Estonia that piled behind EID, and it's turned out to be great. If EID had just been the entire world of mafia moved to Estonia and set up headquarters there, they would have stopped doing it and everybody else would have said no, right?
Yeah.
As it is, it actually worked out pretty well. Other countries will now kind of follow suit, probably including this one. So I think that it has to be a process of continued experiment. And we're going to have to look really carefully about why the financial services industry lives in a separate compartment from the rest of the world. And if we're going to broaden out access to these kind of complex financial instruments, do we have to bring the financial industry standards with us? So you end up with a super regulated world with all kinds of crazy new financial stuff, but it's all totally bolted down? Or do you wind up with some mechanism that says, 5-10% of your assets you can do whatever you like with, welcome to the casino, and we protect people that way? Or do we have some kind of investor certification scheme where it says, okay, you got a PhD in computer science, you can invest anything you like in computer startups, but you're not allowed into biology? Because if we don't build protective structures, you could tokenize the world, immediately followed by global bankruptcy. And so we're going to need some way of figuring out how to manage the risk, how to manage the behavioral economics factors, because if we don't do these things, we know exactly what we're going to get and we're going to hate it.
Thanks a lot, Vinay Gupta.
Splendid. Really enjoyed it.